Heart for Soul and Body. 1. When Teresa came home, it was almost 1:30 in the morning. She went into the bathroom, put on her pajamas, lay down next to Tomas, who was asleep. She leaned over his face and, kissing it, detected a curious aroma coming from his hair. She took another whiff and yet another. She sniffed him up and down like a dog before realizing what it was, the aroma of a woman's sex organ. The alarm went off. Karenин's great moment had arrived. He always woke up much earlier than they did, but did not dare disturb them. He would wait impatiently for the alarm because it gave him the right to jump on the bed, trample their bodies, and butt them with his muzzle. For a time they had tried to curb him and pushed him off the bed, but he was more headstrong than they were and would end up defending his rights. Lately, Teresa realized she positively enjoyed being welcomed into the day by Karenin. Waking up is sheer delight with him. He always showed a naive and simple amazement in the discovery that he was back on Earth, that he was sincerely pleased. She, on the other hand, awoke with great reluctance, with a desire to stave off the day by keeping her eyes closed. Now he was standing in the entrance hall, gazing up at the hat stand, where his leash and collar hung ready. She slipped his head through the collar, and off they went together to do the shopping. She needed to pick up some milk, butter, bread, and, as usual, his morning roll. Later he trotted back alongside her, a roll in mouth, looking proudly from side to side, gratified by the attention he attracted for the passer-by. Once home, he would stretch out his roll on the threshold of the bedroom and wait for Tomas to take notice of him, creep up to him, snarl at him, and make believe he was trying to snatch his roll away from him. That was how it went every day. Not until they had chased each other through the flat for at least 5 minutes would Karenin scramble under our table and gobble up the roll. This time, however, he waited in vain for his morning ritual. Tomas had a small transistor radio on the table in front of him and was listening to it intently, too. It was a program about the Czech immigration, a montage of private conversations recorded with the latest bugging devices by a Czech spy who had infiltrated the immigrant community and then returned to great glory to Prague. It was insignificant prattle, dotted with some harsh words that they got the occupation regime, but here and there one immigrant would call another an imbecile or fraud. These trivial remarks were the point of the broadcast. They were meant to prove not merely that immigrants had bad things to say about the Soviet Union, which neither surprised nor upset anyone in the country, but they called one another names and make free use of dirty words. People use filthy language all day long, but when they turn on the radio and hear a well-known personality, someone they respect, saying F in every sentence, they feel somehow let down. It all started with Prochazka, said Tomas. Jan Prochazka, a 40-year-old Czech novelist with the strength and vitality of an ox, began criticizing public affairs vociferously even before 1968, that he became one of the best-loved figures of the Prague Spring, the dizzying liberation of the communism, which ended with the Russian invasion. Shortly after the invasion, the press initiated a smear campaign against him, and the more they smeared, the more people liked him. Then in 1970, to be exact, the Czech radio broadcast a series of private talks between Prochazka and a professor's friend of his who had taken place years before. That is, in the spring of 1968. For a long time, neither of them had any idea the professor's flat was bugged and every step dodged. Prochazka believed to regale his friends with hyperbole and excess. Now his excess had become a weekly radio series. The secret police who produced and directed the show took pains to emphasize the sequences which he made fun of his friends. Dubček, for instance, people slander their friends at the drop of the hat, and they were more shocked by the beloved man than by the much-hated secret police. Tomas turned off the radio and said every country has a secret police, but the secret police that broadcasts its tapes over the radio, that's something that could happen only in Prague, something absolutely without precedent. I know a precedent, said Teresa. When I was 14, I kept a secret diary. I was terrified someone might read it, so I kept it hidden in the attic. Mother sniffed it out one day at a dinner. We were all hunched over our soup. She took it out of her pocket and said, "Listen carefully now, everybody," and after a sentence she burst out laughing. They all laughed so hard they couldn't eat 3. He always had to try to get her to stay in bed and let him have breakfast alone. She never gave in. Tomas was at work from 7 to 4, Teresa from 4 to midnight. If she were to miss breakfast with him, the only time they could actually talk together was on Sundays. That was when she got up and then went back to bed. This morning, however, she was afraid to go back to sleep because at 10 she was due at the sauna on Zoffin Island. The sauna, though coveted by many, could accommodate only the few, and the only way to get in was by pool. Luckily, the cashier was wife and a professor removed from the university after 1968, and the professor a friend of the former patient of Tomas's. Tomas told the patient told the professor told his wife, and Teresa had a ticket waiting for her once a week. She walked there. She detested the trams and constantly packed with people pushing into another's hate-filled embraces, stepping into another's feet, tearing off one another's coat buttons and shouting insults. It was drizzling. The people rushed by. They began opening umbrellas over their heads, and all at once the streets were crowded too. Arched umbrella roofs collided with one another. The men were courteous, and when passing Teresa, they held their umbrellas high over their heads and gave her room to go by. But the women would not yield. Each looked straight ahead, waiting for the other women to acknowledge her inferiority and step aside. The meeting of the umbrellas was a test of strength. At first, Teresa gave way, but then she realized her courtesy was not being reciprocated. She started clutching her umbrella like other women, ramming it forcefully against the oncoming umbrellas. No one ever said sorry. For the most part, no one said anything, although once or twice she did hear a fat cow or F you. The women thus armed with umbrellas were both young and old, and younger among them proved more steeled warriors. Teresa recalled the days of the invasion and the girls in miniskirts carrying flags on long staffs. Theirs was a sexual vengeance. The Russian soldiers had been kept in forced celibacy for several young years, and must have felt they had landed on a planet invented by a science fiction writer, a planet of stunning women who paraded their scorn on beautiful long legs, the likes of which had not been seen in Russia for the past 5 or 6 centuries. She had taken many pictures of those young women against a backdrop of tanks. How she had admired them, and now these same women were bumping into her meanly and spitefully. Instead of flags, they held umbrellas, but they held them with the same pride. They were ready to fight as obstinately against a foreign army as would against an umbrella that refused to move out of their way. 4. She came out into Old Town Square. The stern spires of Tyne Church, the irregular rectangle of Gothic Baroque houses, Old Town Hall, which dated to the 14th century and had once stretched over a whole side of the square, which it runs, had been so for 27 years. Warsaw, Dresden, Berlin, Cologne, Budapest, all were horribly scarred in the last war, but their inhabitants had built them up against a painstaking restored old historical sections. The people of Prague had an inferiority complex with respect to the other cities. Old Town Hall was the only monument of note destroyed in the war, and they decided to leave it in ruins so that no Pole or German could accuse them of having suffered less than their share. In front of the glorious ruins, a reminder for now of the eternity of the evils perpetuated by war, stood a steel bar reviewing stand for some of the demonstration or other that the Communist Party had herded the people of Prague the day before, or would be herding them to the day after. Gazing at the remains of Old Town Hall, Teresa was suddenly reminded of her mother, that perverse need one has to expose one's ruins, one's ugliness, to parade one's misery, to uncover the stump of one's amputated arm and force the whole world to look at it. Everything had begun reminding her of her mother lately. Her mother's world, which she had fled 10 years before, seemed to be coming back to her, surrounding her on all sides. That was what she told Tomas one morning about how her mother had read her secret diary at the dinner table to an accompaniment of Gopal's. When a private talk over a bottle of wine is broadcast on the radio, what can it mean but that the world is turning into a concentration camp? Almost from childhood, Teresa had used the term to express how she felt about life with her family. A concentration camp is a world in which people live crammed together constantly night and day. Brutality and violence are merely secondary and not in the least indispensable characteristics. A concentration camp is the complete obliteration of privacy. Prochaska, who was not allowed to chat with a friend over a bottle of wine in the shelter of privacy, lived, unknown to him, a fatal error on his part, in a concentration camp. Teresa lived in the concentration camp where she lived with her mother. Almost from childhood she knew that a concentration camp was nothing exceptional or startling, but something very basic, a given into which we are born, and from which we can escape only with the greatest of efforts. 5. Women sitting in the 3 terraced benches were packed in so tightly they could not help touching. Sweating away next to Teresa was a woman of about 30 with a very pretty face. She had 2 unbelievably large, pendulous breasts hanging from her shoulders, bouncing at the slightest movement. When the woman got up, Teresa saw that her behind was like 2 enormous sacks, and that it had nothing in common with her fine face. Perhaps the woman stood frequently in front of the mirror, observing her body, trying to peer through it into her soul, as Teresa had done since childhood. Surely she, too, had harbored the blissful hope of using her body as a poster for her soul. But what a monstrous soul it would have had to be if it reflected that body, that rack of 4 pouches. Teresa got up and rinsed herself off under the shower. She went out into the open. It was still drizzling. Standing just above the Vltava on the slatted deck, and sheltered from her eyes in the city a few square feet of the tall wooden panel, she looked down to see the head of the woman she had just been thinking about. It was bobbing on the surface of the rushing river. The woman smiled up at her. She had a delicate nose, large brown eyes, and a childish glance. As she climbed the ladder, her tender features gave way to 2 sets of quivering pouches, spraying tiny drops of cold water right and left.